Good morning. The first item of business is general questions, and at question number 1, I call Evelyn Tweed.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what steps it has taken to improve access to childminders.
Minister Natalie Dawn.
Childminders are a hugely valued part of the early learning and childcare profession in Scotland, and we want more families to be able to access the unique benefits that they can offer to families. We've been working hard with the Scottish Childminding Association on a new approach for the sector, and I'm really pleased to confirm a 3-year programme of childminder recruitment and retention was launched on June the 5th. Backed by more than £1 million of Scottish Government funding, the programme for Scotland's childminding future will be available in at least 16 local authorities during the first year. The programme will see the SCMA scale up their already successful pilots, which include a £750 start-up grant and tailored support for new childminders, as well as more practical assistance for the existing workforce.
Evelyn Tweed.
Childminders provide a vital service but often work alone. How will the Government ensure that childminders are supported and that childminding can be a sustainable career?
Minister.
Ms Tweed is correct that childminders often run a business on their own, so it's important that they feel both supported and connected to others in the profession. The SCMA's new programme will implement a range of further measures to help childminders with their workloads and professional development, building on the diverse range of support that they already provide. This will include more practical assistance to existing childminders, includes the piloting of a new mentoring scheme, which aims to help reduce workplace isolation and create networks of support. It also includes a trial of funded time off the floor, which will test models of funded time for childminders to undertake professional learning and networking activities. From the feedback and engagement I've had, I believe that these actions will help to ensure childminding remains a valued, sustainable and fulfilling career choice.
Brief supplementary, Ros McCall.
Thank you. A few weeks ago, the Scottish Government announced plans to increase Scotland's childminding workforce by 1,000. However, Scotland lost over 2,500 childminders between 2012 and 2022. So, does the Minister accept that the plans don't really go far enough, and how do they intend to replace 1,500 childminders as well as retain to fulfil the 1140 childcare flexibilities that were promised by the Scottish parents?
Minister.
Well, I thank Ros McCall for that question, and I would say that this pilot is a really positive start. However, I think we know that we have more to do because, as I've previously iterated and said, childminders are a hugely valued part of our childcare sector. So we want them to feel valued and we want them to feel safe in their roles. Now, this pilot will have, I think, really valuable learning. We will see how successful this pilot is. I'm very positive about the success of it, and then we'll take further actions based on that learning.
Brief supplementary, Martin Whitfield.
I'm very grateful, Presiding Officer. Can I ask the Minister, and I do reflect the fact that they are hugely valuable in our child services childminders, what figure does she hope to get to by 26-27 for the childminding community, given that we are currently at 3,225 and, as was previously stated, back in December 2012 it was 6,200. What is the Minister's target?
Minister.
We are aiming to increase the childminder sector by 1,000. In our first year, SCMA are aiming to recruit 250 new childminders. As I've said, this is a really positive start with big aims. Childminders are, as I say, a hugely valued part of our sector, and I'm very positive about this campaign and this pilot and what it will bring for the sector.
Question number 2, Paul O'Kane.
To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on its ongoing work with local authorities, Police Scotland and other partners to tackle the reported increasing antisocial behaviour in town centres.
Minister Siobhan Brown.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. We support Police Scotland and local authorities to continue to invest in prevention, early intervention and diversionary activities to reduce antisocial behaviour. They have a wide range of powers and they are best placed to lead on addressing these issues. Additionally, an independent working group on antisocial behaviour is currently examining our strategic approach to antisocial behaviour and is undertaking widespread engagement to deliver their report later this year. We have also provided local authorities with over £600 million of additional revenue, while Police Scotland has received an increase of £92.7 million despite difficult financial circumstances due to UK government austerity.
I thank the Minister for her answer, and she will be aware of the problems of antisocial behaviour across the country, but specifically in parts of Barrhead, which is in my region, and particularly around the Asda supermarket. We debated this issue last year, and other members put across to the Minister the challenges, particularly around supermarkets across the country. I've been engaging with the various stakeholders. I noticed that she referred to her independent working group and its reporting later this year, but will she agree to meet with me to give me an update on that work, and can she be any more specific on the timescale for publication?
Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Yes, I would be more than happy to meet with the member, but also just with the timescale, it is the end of this year. I do feel with retail especially that we've seen an increase against antisocial behaviour, so we are working with that. The member might be interested to also know that I have been visiting local authorities and seeing initiatives that are working around the whole of Scotland, and I am looking to implement this and good guidance towards local authorities moving forward.
Brief supplementary, Audrey Nicholl.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As the police are often the first line of response to incidents of antisocial behaviour, it's absolutely vital that policing continues to be a priority for the Scottish Government. So, with that in mind, can the Minister provide further detail as to the funding being provided by the Scottish Government in policing to ensure that antisocial behaviour in communities continues to be fully addressed?
Minister.
Officer, policing remains a Scottish Government priority, and despite difficult financial circumstances due to austerity, the Scottish budget for 24 to 25 includes record police total funding of £1.55 billion, which, as just said, is an increase of £92.7 million. This increase includes an additional £75.7 million resource budget to protect and to support frontline policing. Decisions on the allocation of these resources, including those designed to tackle antisocial behaviour, are quite properly a matter for the Chief Constable, who is accountable to the SPA. When the 24-25 budget was announced in December last year, Ms Farrell made clear to the Criminal Justice Committee that the allocation is an important recognition of Police Scotland's value and the contribution policing makes to Scotland being a safe place to live and work with historically low levels of crime.
Sharon Dowie.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. While I welcome free bus travel for under-22s, one unintended consequence is that a minority of young people have abused the scheme to commit antisocial behaviour outside of their hometowns. The Transport Minister has since told us that she has asked officials to look at what temporary digital blocking measures could be used. Can the Minister tell us what conversations she's had with the Transport Minister and update us on what digital blocking measures could be used to withdraw free travel from the minority of young people who commit antisocial behaviours across our towns?
Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I have had several conversations with the Cabinet Secretary for Transport. We have to remember the vast majority of young people who travel by bus behave appropriately, although the Scottish Government can withdraw or suspend a card if a person knowingly allows it to be used by another. The legislation that underpins the current scheme does not provide a clear mechanism for blocking of cards relating to the allegations of antisocial behaviour. The Antisocial Behaviour Scotland Act 2004 provides a wide range of measures for dealing with all antisocial behaviour, including dispersal orders, which can be considered by police in consultation with the local authority on an individual temporary basis. Transport Scotland is also working closely with the bus industry to develop and implement any measures that can be taken forward to deter antisocial behaviour.
Thank you. Question number 3, Sue Webber.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government whether it can provide further details on the progress that it has made regarding the delivery of a railway station in Winchburgh, including the date by which it anticipates the business case and the cost will be finalised.
Minister Jim Fairley.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As the member is aware, this proposal is included in the Council's development plan, and it was always the case that this was a developer-led proposal, and one which I welcome, as I know that the MSP for the constituency, Fiona Hislop, does as well. Now, there have been calls for the Government to get involved because of a lack of progress in taking this project forward for various reasons, and a call which I am happy to do so, insofar as bringing the parties together which will allow progress. Now, I met in April with Winchburgh Developments Limited, West Lothian Council and Network Rail to discuss how they can support progress towards the delivery of a station in Winchburgh. Now, all parties agreed to several actions, and Transport Scotland officials are investigating the development of the business case. and I am aware that the Council have now written to the City Region Deal Project Office to explore opportunities through this funding process. And the Scottish Government remains committed to progressing the proposal, and they are supporting the Council and the developer and encourage them to continue engaging with the Government on this matter.
Sue Webber.
I thank the Minister for that response, and I can remind him that no developer has ever led the delivery of a new station anywhere in Scotland. The economic and environmental case for a train station at Winchburgh is undeniable. Passengers will save £2.4 million. There will be £3.5 million of decongestion benefits. There will also be almost 500,000 fewer car journeys every year. The list goes on, and you've acknowledged this in your letter to Edward Mountain, convener of the Net Zero Energy and Transport Committee, and there is a keen interest to build the station at Winchburgh. It remains of significant public interest. The next meeting is in 5 days. The people of Winchburgh deserve much more. Can we expect a positive announcement and significant progress to be made before we return to Parliament in September? Minister.
To correct what the member has just said, Belgrave Station is proposed with East Renfrewshire Council acting as the lead proposer. Now, the Council have obtained the required funding through the successful application to the City Region deal, and transport officials have provided East Renfrewshire Council with the strategic support towards the development of the outline business case and the final business case process. So it's not correct to say that a council cannot lead on these. This is a developer-led programme. The Government will support them in every way that we can to take it forward, but the local authority and the developer have to sit round the table so that we make sure we can get this progressed.
Question number 4, Alexander Burnett.
To ask the Scottish Government what action it is taking to support schools in rural communities.
Minister Graham Day.
Presiding Officer, rural schools play an important role in our communities in Scotland. There is a presumption against the closure of rural schools. Where local authorities plan to close a school, they are required to undertake a thorough and lengthy consultation process. This includes demonstrating the educational benefit of the closure, considering the impact of the school closure on the local community and school travel arrangements, and consulting the community on alternatives to closure. This process ensures that the impact of any decision is properly considered and options are explored. No school closure decision should ever be taken lightly.
Alexander Burnett.
The Cabinet Secretary wrote to me on the 3rd of June to confirm the most recent list of rural schools in Scotland showed there were 21 mothballed primary schools, with Aberdeenshire and Highland councils having the most with 4 in each. That list was in 2021, 3 years ago. Now, in Aberdeenshire alone, I believe there are now 14 mothballed, with 16 more at risk, including Tully-Nestle and Logie Colston in my constituency. This is a clear betrayal of our rural communities. So does the Minister have any idea how many primary schools are currently mothballed across Scotland, and what is he going to do about it?
Minister.
You really do need to admire the brass neck behind that question, given that Aberdeenshire Council is Tory-controlled. Presiding Officer, local authorities have the responsibility for the school estate, and decisions around closures and mothballing of schools are for them to take. And ministers can only have the power to call in a local authority decision where the closure of the school is permanent. From the information that we've been provided with in relation to Tully-Nestle, thus far, I should say, that would appear to constitute a permanent closure. However, my officials have written to the local authority to seek further information about their plans and to remind them, in this instance, of their responsibilities under the Schools Consultation Scotland Act 2010. In regard to the numbers that the member is seeking, I will write to him with that. But I go back to my point earlier, Presiding Officer. Absolute brass neck. And if Mr Burnett is genuinely concerned and shares the concerns of local residents about the two school mothballings, as they are referred to, he might want to have a chat with some of his councillor colleagues in Aberdeenshire.
Christine Graham.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I'm sure the Minister will welcome the progress in 2 secondary new build schools in my constituency, Peebles High and Gala Academy, both due to complete next year, funded by the Scottish Government. But does he agree with me that it's a massive burden on Scottish Borders Council budget that previous border secondary schools were built under PPP PFI in 2009 by the then Tory Liberal Democrat administration at an initial cost of £72 million, but by the end of the contract in 2039 it will cost them £258 million, and that we should never forget the punishing continuing cost of funded projects by PPP PFI, which thankfully the Scottish Government ditched.
Minister.
Obviously, the Scottish Government were pleased to announce in December 2020 that we would provide financial support to Borders Council for their priority projects, namely Gala Shields Community Campus and Peebles High School, through Phase 2 of the joint £2 billion Learning Estate Investment Programme. As the member rightly notes, this is not through the discredited PFI scheme, which the public purse is still bearing the costs of, limiting the amount of money that we, and indeed councils, have to invest in frontline services. The toxic legacy of PFI is still being felt in Scotland, and Labour members in this chamber should be ashamed of their party's record of government.
Question number 5, Annabel Ewing.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on the Developing the Young Workforce programme in the Cowdenbeath constituency.
Minister Graham Day.
Officer, developing the young workforce plays a crucial role in the delivery of the Scottish Government's commitment to ensuring that school leavers are supported to achieve their potential. DYW schools coordinators and regional groups, including the Edinburgh and South East Scotland DYW regional group, which covers Fife, take the lead on planning and delivering tailored events to meet the needs of young people and employers, facilitating connections with a range of delivery partners. The Government remains committed to DYW, with funding of £12.9 million being invested in 24-25 to fund regional groups and schools coordinators.
Annabel Ewing.
I thank the Minister for his response. He will be aware, of course, that Fife has in fact been a trailblazer in facilitating vocational training for young people, with Lochgelly High School, the Purvis Group and Babcocks, amongst others, having played a pivotal role over the years. Can I ask the Minister what can be done to see such an embedding of the Developing the Young Workforce programme right across Scotland to ensure that all that can be done is being done to provide young people with a route into skilled and well-paid jobs?
Minister.
Presiding Officer, I absolutely share Annabel Ewing's high regard for the work of DYW, whether that be in her Cowdenbeath constituency, across Fife or elsewhere in Scotland. I also agree entirely that there's more to do to embed DYW into the offering we give our young people as they consider their future career paths. The nature of DYW provision can vary from local authority to local authority, and that's why my officials are working with DYW to see how we might enhance their standing. I've also been clear that I see DYW as an important pillar of the improved wider careers offering we're developing, as we seek to furnish our young people with the fullest possible understanding of the options they have at their disposal.
Thank you. Question number 6 has been withdrawn. Question number 7, Elena Whittam.
To ask the Scottish Government, in light of research by the Institute of Fiscal Studies indicating that forecast UK Government tax and spending plans would be funded by reductions in public investment, what assessment it has made of the potential impact that any changes to Scotland's block grant resulting from this would have on Scotland's public finances?
Cabinet Secretary Shona Robertson.
As highlighted by the Institute for Fiscal Studies, whoever wins the election, unprotected budgets face cuts of up to £20 billion by 2028-29. We do not know what this means for our budget, as the IFS have also pointed out that there is absolutely zero clarity from either the Conservatives or Labour about where those might fall. However, decisions by the UK Government have already cost Scotland up to £1.6 billion in potential consequentials, and it's clear that any future UK Government will deliver more of the same for Scotland.
Elena Whittam.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for her answer. I am deeply concerned by the scale of the cuts we face under the next UK Government. If a more realistic position is not taken by the leading Westminster parties, will the Cabinet Secretary call on her next UK counterpart to seriously consider the merits of Scotland's more progressive tax system of income tax, which could potentially provide over £15 billion in additional tax take for vital public services if applied across the rest of the UK?
Cabinet Secretary.
So we have repeatedly called on the UK Government to use the powers at its disposal to provide the funding needed to invest in our vital public services. Our own decisions on income tax since devolution will see an additional £1.5 billion raised in 2024-25 compared to if we had matched current policy in the rest of the UK. Ultimately, our position is that far greater powers over taxation should be devolved so we can design a tax system that works for Scotland and allows us to raise the revenue needed to invest in vital public services.
Brief supplementary, Daniel Johnson.
I was just wondering if the Cabinet Secretary could outline what the IFS says about the gap in the SNP's fiscal projections from their manifesto launch yesterday, and indeed how it intends to fill the £2 billion black hole that the Fiscal Commission outlines in the Scottish Government's financial plans.
Cabinet Secretary.
I think Labour are on very dodgy ground indeed, given that they will not clarify whether or not they are going to continue with an austerity budget if they win the election, which will mean that cuts of up to £20 billion will ensue by 2028-29. On top of that, of course, the leader of the Scottish Labour Party has said that they will reverse the tax raising powers that we have used here in Scotland that have raised £1.5 billion. If that reversal happens, then not only will we have the austerity cuts from Westminster, we will then have a double whammy of £1.5 billion of less funding for vital public services, and the public need to know about those plans from Labour.
Thank you. That concludes general questions. The next item of business is First Minister's questions. At question number 1, I call Douglas Ross.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The oil and gas sector is vital for the North East and the whole of Scotland. The Rosebank energy development will create 1,600 jobs and bring £6 billion of investment to the country. Why does John Swinney oppose that?
First Minister.
Well, Presiding Officer, the issues in connection with the Rosebank oil field have been the subject of a very active case that is influenced by a decision in the Supreme Court today. So I will need to be careful about what I say in relation to the Rosebank case. Mr Ross will acknowledge the Scottish Government believes that any new application for oil and gas developments has to have associated with it a very detailed and specific climate compatibility assessment undertaken to determine whether any such development can proceed in a fashion that is compatible with our journey to net zero, and that's the approach that the Government believes should be the case.
Douglas Ross.
1,600 jobs, £6 billion of investment, and an SNP First Minister who cannot welcome that, who cannot support it, because the SNP oppose every single new oil and gas development in the North Sea. Oh. Well, we're hearing no from Kevin Stewart. I wonder if John Swinney will be able to tell us which ones the Scottish Government support. Because here's what some of John Swinney's predecessors have said. Nicola Sturgeon, who John Swinney stood side by side with for decades, said Rosebank was, in her words, the greatest act of economic vandalism in her lifetime. When the development was given the green light, Humza Yousaf said it was it was the wrong decision. And just last week, John Swinney, speaking about new oil and gas licences, said the granting of them was utterly irresponsible. So why has SNP leader after SNP leader been against granting new oil and gas licences for the North Sea?
First Minister.
I think one of the reasons why Douglas Ross is leaving the leadership of the Conservative Party...
Mr Ross. First Minister. Mr Ross, we will not continue in such a manner. We must conduct our business in a courteous and respectful manner. First Minister.
Presiding Officer, one of the reasons why I suspect Douglas Ross is leaving the leadership of the Conservative Party is that he is not presenting an accurate picture of the remarks that I have made. Because
Members, let's hear one another.
The very specific remark that I made was that a commitment to undertake, without any scrutiny, 100 new oil and gas licences by the Prime Minister was climate denial of the first order and utterly and totally reckless. Those were my words, and I will not have them misrepresented by Douglas Ross. We've got a rational and considered process that we've argued for, which is that we should have that every individual application should be subject to a climate compatibility assessment, because there is a journey that we have to make as a country to reach net zero. That is inescapable. And what is clear from the position taken by the Prime Minister, supported by Douglas Ross and the Conservatives, is that they don't care about the journey on climate. They are not interested in the crisis that we face in the climate emergency. Well, this government will take the responsible approach to managing that transition and the challenges of the climate emergency.
Douglas Ross.
Well, what we've just heard from John Swinney there, and his MSPs are applauding, is John Swinney and the SNP don't care about tens of thousands of jobs in the north east of Scotland. They don't care about the oil and gas sector, which is needed now for our energy security at the moment and going forward. Because when Rosebank was approved, when Cambo was improved, when any new development is approved, the SNP oppose it. They oppose new oil and gas developments. And let's hear, that was the previous First Ministers, that John Swinney didn't seem to want to hear what they'd said and his own comments that new licences were utterly irresponsible. Let's hear about some of his current Cabinet Ministers. Mary McCallan, the Energy Secretary, said this: "We do not agree with the UK Government issuing new oil and gas licences." I'll read it again. "We do not agree with the new UK Government issuing new oil and gas licences." This is the SNP Scottish Government Energy Secretary. And I've got here a letter her predecessor wrote. Neil Gray, the former Energy Secretary, said this. He was writing to climate activists. "We have long expressed our concern about Rosebank being given the go-ahead." And before that, we had Michael Matheson, who brought forward a consultation on a presumption against new oil and gas licences. So why does SNP Energy Secretary after SNP Energy Secretary oppose new oil and gas licences, which are crucial to the Scottish energy sector?
First Minister.
I think if Mr Ross was to look at the material the Government has published and the process that we believe should be taken forward in a rational and considered way, he will find that the Government's position is anchored around a number of principles. We've got to assess the compatibility of any oil and gas licence application with the journey towards net zero, and that has got to be a rigorous and thorough process that has to be undertaken. Secondly, we have got to consider issues in relation to our energy security in coming to that assessment. And thirdly, we have got to take a responsible approach to managing the transition to net zero. Now, I am not going to stand here and be lectured by a leader of the Conservative Party whose party presided over the industrial devastation of central Scotland, the consequences of which we are still having to address as a government. So this government will take the responsible approach to the management of the oil and gas sector and its transition to net zero, and we will take absolutely no lessons from the Conservatives.
Douglas Ross.
There is nothing, John Swinney, rational or considered about turning your back on the Scottish oil and gas sector by claiming that you are against every oil and gas licence, but being unable to say it, being unable to be truthful with the people of Scotland. The First Minister should just be honest. The SNP oppose every single new oil and gas licence being issued by the UK Government. That is the case. Because whenever a new development is proposed in the North Sea, the SNP oppose it. They oppose every round of new licences granted for the oil and gas sector. In recent years, they have not supported any new fields. Not one. Whatever John Swinney is claiming today, it's only a temporary position for the SNP, because their position is actually very clear. They don't and will not stand up for Scotland's oil and gas industry. They are willing to put tens of thousands of jobs and the North East economy at risk. The Scottish Conservatives support Scotland's oil and gas industry. Why do the SNP oppose it?
First Minister.
I'm not sure Douglas Ross is on his strongest ground, taking me to task about honesty.
Mr Ross, I would ask you to apologise for that comment.
Apologise again for calling the First Minister Honest John.
Mr Ross, we are not going to continue like this, and I would ask you to reflect on your conduct. First Minister.
I don't think Douglas Ross is in a particularly strong position today to raise issues of honesty with me when the Gambling Commission is investigating the alleged conduct of senior figures in the Conservative and Unionist Party. I think Douglas Ross is on thin ground. I also don't think.
Sorry. This is actually First Minister's questions, where many members across this chamber wish to have an opportunity to put a question to the First Minister. I'd like to make sure that is possible for as many members as possible, and in order to do that we must conduct ourselves in a courteous and respectful manner. First Minister.
And I also don't think Douglas Ross is on strong ground in attacking me about the rational and considered position the Scottish Government is taking when the Prime Minister is ignoring the climate emergency by sanctioning 100 oil and gas licences without any questions being asked. That is irresponsible. Yes. That is the action that will accelerate the climate emergency. So this Government will take the rational and considered approach to oil and gas developments. We will also support the oil and gas sector to transition to the essential work we need to undertake on renewables, because Scotland's future lies as a green energy renewables powerhouse, and the Scottish Government is putting in place the measures to make that happen.
Question number 2, Anna Sarwar.
Presiding Officer, our NHS faces a national crisis in what is known as corridor care, where patients are treated on trolleys in corridors because there simply are not enough beds in wards for them. And this week the Royal College of Emergency Medicine published new analysis which found that on average 45% of patients treated in our emergency departments didn't have access to a private cubicle. In their words, when no cubicle is available, patients are treated in other areas. Trolleys in corridors, cars, the waiting rooms, relative rooms, plaster rooms. Imagine you or one of your loved ones lying on a trolley for hours. No privacy, no dignity, just pain and distress. After 17 years of this SNP government, why has corridor care become such commonplace?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, as Mr Sarwar will know, the issues in relation to the National Health Service are driven by the challenges in the National Health Service today are driven by a number of factors. One of them is the increase in demand in the aftermath of COVID, which the National Health Service is doing its level best to try to address. We are wrestling also with the challenges of our hospitals being significantly congested because of the challenges around delayed discharge, which come largely from the fact that we do not have enough social care packages available in the community because we don't have enough people in the workforce to deliver the volume of social care packages that are required. And that is a consequence of the loss of population because of the loss of free movement under Brexit. So the issues that we are wrestling with are significant and acute, and the Government and our health boards are focused on addressing that. But finally, let me say to Mr Sarwar that if anybody is treated in the fashion that he has recounted, and I've seen media reports this morning of a particular case at the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital, then I apologise unreservedly to anybody who has that experience and assure members of the public and their families that the Government is doing all that it possibly can do to address that circumstance.
Anna Sarwar.
I've been coming to this chamber week after week for the last 3 years, and week after week we've been hearing apologies from SNP First Ministers, and then we just get apologies the week after, and the week after nothing actually changes in terms of people's lived experience. But let's be clear, long waits cost lives. The Royal College of Emergency Medicine have warned that for every 72 patients who wait over 8 hours in A&E, there will be one excess death. That's a death that could be avoided if the patient had been treated on time. That means so far this year, more than 1,000 Scots have died who could have been saved had they been treated on time. 1,000 avoidable deaths. 1,000 people so far this year alone, and it's only June, First Minister. Those are fathers and mothers, sons and daughters who died because they couldn't get their care on time. Why have these families been so badly let down by this SNP government?
First Minister.
In my earlier answer, I set out some of the issues that are driving this particular situation. And those issues are, to repeat them, the increase in demand after COVID, the congestion in our hospitals. Hospitals are now in excess of 95% occupancy, which is far, far too high. It should be about 10% lower than that for ordinary activity. And the absence of adequate social care capacity within the community, because we quite simply do not have enough social care workers to deliver those packages. So that is the explanation of the problem. And Mr Sarwar says to me that he comes here week after week to raise these issues, and I know that he does, and he gets these answers. But what it does is it requires us to take action. So this government has taken action. This government has taken the action of increasing tax on higher earners to boost investment in the National Health Service. The National Health Service would have lower money available to it if this government had not taken the hard decisions on tax. And we have an opportunity, as a consequence of the general election, to do something about it, to encourage more people to be in the labour force, which would require us to reintroduce freedom of movement so that people could come to work in this country, or to encourage more investment and to take more investment decisions, like ending austerity. And of course, what Mr Sarwar's party is proposing is no answer on those questions. In fact, they're proposing the reverse. They're saying we'll maintain Brexit and we'll maintain austerity. That's not good enough. It's time for the Labour Party to act.
Anna Sarwar.
For a politician to have been in power for 17 years, and that's the best answer he can give, I think has to take a really serious look in the mirror. And in actual fact, it was John Swinney as Finance Secretary that cut local government budgets and cut social care budgets across the country. So perhaps some reflection on his own record. Because the reality, Presiding Officer, is that patients and staff have been failed and let down by this SNP government. And a few weeks ago, the Royal College of Nursing reported on this issue as well, and quoted a Scottish nurse. And let me quote that nurse. "We don't complain for ourselves, but for the patient. There are no screens to go round the patient, so if they are being bed-bathed or need a bedpan, you have to take a patient out of their bed space and move them into a corridor. Then move the extra patient into the bed space to use the bedpan. It's time-consuming, there is not enough space in the rooms, and it's undignified for the patient." This is the unbearable situation that is such an unfairness to the patients and staff. So, First Minister, directly to this nurse, explain to this heartbroken nurse why you and your government continues to let them down so badly.
Always through the Chair. First Minister.
I've explained what the challenge and the difficulty is. And the government has taken the action of increasing taxation for higher earners to invest more in the National Health Service than would have been the case had we just passed on the consequentials from UK funding. So we have taken the hard decisions, and there was, of course, a time when Mr Sarwar would have supported us, but Mr Sarwar has now U-turned on that position, and Mr Sarwar now wants to cut the money available to the public finances as a consequence of what he said on Tuesday. Now, Mr Sarwar is shaking his head at me. Mr Sarwar obviously doesn't understand what he was saying at his press conference on Tuesday, because what the consequences of his stance will be to reduce public expenditure in Scotland. So it is quite simply beyond credibility to come here and ask me to invest more money in the National Health Service to tackle the issues that Mr Sarwar is concerned about, when he wants to cut public expenditure and any prospective incoming United Kingdom government will also be cutting public expenditure. So my answer to that nurse is that we've got to have an end to austerity, and she won't get it from the Labour government.
Question number 3, Patrick Harvey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. In precisely that vein, this week the First Minister tried to present the SNP as the only party committed to ending the cuts and reversing austerity. But apart from changes to income tax, which have already been done in Scotland thanks to pressure from the Greens, the only actual change he proposed was to devolve taxes, not increase them. Now, Scotland should have control over oil and gas windfall taxes, other corporate taxes, national insurance, fuel duty or VAT, but only if we actually use those powers to raise revenue. And the only change that the First Minister proposed was actually a VAT cut. So does he agree with the Greens that reversing the cuts and providing the investment that the country so clearly needs can only be done by raising significant revenue from those super rich who are hoarding the country's wealth?
First Minister.
There's two aspects to answering that question. The first is the actions of the Scottish Government. And in terms of the actions of the Scottish Government, we have, Mr Harvey will be familiar with these points, we've taken a range of decisions to vary the tax position in Scotland and in some circumstances to ask higher earners to pay more in taxation where it is appropriate for that to be undertaken. So the Government has set out its position and its fiscal approach to enable that to be the case. There is then the debate about the forthcoming United Kingdom election, and of course I set out my party's position yesterday. If the presiding officer will forgive me, I would refer Mr Harvey to the contents of our manifesto, which set out a number of tax changes and spending changes that we would make to enable the priorities that we set out to be afforded within the financial envelope available to us.
Thank you. Before I call Mr Harvey, I would remind members that the Chamber is not the place to campaign for a UK general election. Patrick Harvey.
Indeed, presiding officer, and the First Minister is right about the additional revenue from income tax as a result of the work the Greens did to show how that could be done. But he presented no plans for a wealth tax, no plans at all for a wealth tax. But as I say, the Greens did work out the detail on progressive income tax for Scotland, so maybe the First Minister is relying on us once again to do the work for him, and he supports our proposals for a wealth tax on the richest 1%, which would raise at least £70 billion. But the real problem for him as First Minister is that whoever forms the next UK government, they are still committed to Tory fiscal rules. And they refuse to rejoin the EU as well, so cutting off both sources of extra revenue that he is relying on. So when a new Labour Chancellor inevitably imposes more austerity to keep their new billionaire backers happy, what will the First Minister do with the taxes he does control? Will he go further to raise the funds that we need to stop more cuts in Scotland? And will he finally scrap the broken council tax system to let our councils raise the revenue they need to protect their services?
First Minister.
President, there's obviously a lot of fiscal choices involved in the question that Mr Harvey puts to me, and Mr Harvey knows me well enough to know that the budget doesn't get written from here on a Thursday afternoon randomly in question time. There will be a process of engagement across the parliamentary spectrum to enable that to be undertaken. Where I do agree with Mr Harvey, however, is that the conspiracy of silence that exists between the Conservative Party and the Labour Party of hiding the £18 billion worth of cuts from the public is absolutely reprehensible. Because the one thing that's got to happen in the election that we are facing just now, there must be an end to austerity. Our public services cannot cope with any more austerity, and unfortunately the outcome of the United Kingdom general election, the election of either a Conservative or a Labour government, is going to deliver more austerity, and that's why we need to use our votes effectively to stop that in the election.
Question number 4, Claire Adamson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government's position is on the call from the Federation of Small Business Scotland for the next UK administration to pilot a remote visa to benefit remote areas such as the Highlands, in line with the Migration Advisory Committee recommendation, and what the implications of this could have for Scotland's economy.
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, the UK Government's own Migration Advisory Committee described our rural visa pilot proposal as, and I quote, sensible and clear in both scale and deliverability, and highlighted that it's in the UK Government's own interest to trial it. Despite this and the harm caused to our rural and island communities by a hard Brexit, the current United Kingdom Government refused to engage. The business sector recognises these harms. It is therefore welcome that FSB Scotland is calling for a rural visa pilot, recognising businesses need to attract people to Scotland to contribute to our economy and communities. Our offer to the next United Kingdom Government is simple: work with us and stakeholders across Scotland who are calling in the strongest terms possible for this pilot to be delivered.
Claire Adamson.
Thank you. Thank the First Minister for his answer. Scotland's rural communities often face economic challenges for a range of reasons, and this has been exacerbated by a hard Tory Brexit. What is the First Minister's latest assessment on the impact of Brexit on the population of rural Scotland and the ability for businesses facing acute workforce shortages across Scotland to attract new employees, and what is his response to the rejection of the Commission's offer of youth mobility for under-30s?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, the issues that Claire Adamson puts to me are very real issues. I spent several days over the weekend and at the start of this week in the North East, the Highlands, the North West of Scotland and in our islands in the West Coast. And everywhere I went, I was hearing about the challenges of availability of population, which is at the heart of the question that Claire Adamson puts to me. The initiative that the Commission took for a youth mobility scheme, in my view, is welcome. It fits compatibly with the Government's openness towards freedom of movement for individuals. So obviously it's a matter of record that these issues have been resisted by the current United Kingdom Government. I hope there is, after the election, some opportunity to advance these issues, which I will constructively take forward with an incoming United Kingdom Government. It's my intention to engage constructively on some of these questions so we can find practical solutions to the issues that are being put to me by businesses, because if we look to the point that Mr Sarwar raised with me about the health service, one of the areas with the greatest challenge in relation to delayed discharge is the Highlands, and that is about the availability of population within the communities to deliver social care. So the issues that Claire Adamson puts to me are very, very important, and the Government will engage constructively to try to resolve them with an incoming United Kingdom Government.
Question number 5, Graham Simpson.
Thank you. To ask the First Minister what his response is to the reported comment from the Nuclear Industry Association that his stance on nuclear power is hopelessly ideological and anti-science.
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government does not support the building of new nuclear power stations in Scotland. We have abundant natural resources and a highly skilled workforce to take advantage of the many renewable energy opportunities. Evidence shows that new nuclear is more expensive than renewable alternatives. Nuclear energy also creates radioactive waste, which must be safely managed over many decades to protect the environment, requiring complex and expensive handling. The Scottish Government is supporting continued growth in renewables, storage, hydrogen and carbon capture technologies to drive economic growth, support green jobs and provide secure, affordable and clean energy for Scotland.
Graham Simpson.
So it is hopelessly ideological and anti-science. Now, wind is only available 45% of the time. It requires backup from gas compared to nuclear, which is available 90% of the time and is therefore far more reliable. The First Minister's anti-nuclear energy stance has seen gas consumption double since 2015. So I think we have to assume that he wants to follow the example of Germany, Austria and Belgium, who have seen carbon emissions rise after decommissioning nuclear plants. Now, we know the GMB Congress last week called for the Scottish Government to lift the ban. They've now invited Kate Forbes to meet nuclear workers at Hunterston. Will she go?
First Minister.
President Officer, I gave a considered answer to Graham Simpson. I don't think it could in any way be described as ideological, because I made the point that evidence shows that new nuclear is more expensive than renewable alternatives. We're facing a cost of living and public finance crisis, so any responsible First Minister will look to make sure that we make the most fiscally efficient approach to energy generation. Now, this Government, as a result of its clear policy leadership, has successfully decarbonised electricity generation within Scotland. We've developed renewable energy with policy certainty, and I want to give the same policy certainty to storage, to hydrogen, to carbon capture technologies to drive economic growth and support green jobs. What troubles me is that we've got fabulous projects in Scotland, for example in carbon capture and technology, the Acorn project, for example, and we have been led up the garden path by the Treasury and by UK ministers. I've lost count of the number of times when I was a senior minister, where I was promised face to face by UK ministers an acceleration of the Acorn project, and it hasn't happened. So I'm afraid to say Graham Simpson hasn't got a leg to stand on this question. We've got a clear strategy on renewables. We will pursue that, and we'll pursue it sustainably to deliver for the people of Scotland.
Thank you, Dunbar.
I fully support the First Minister on his stance regarding nuclear power. So can I ask the First Minister if any MSPs have ever written to the Scottish Government to propose or support nuclear power stations to be built within their own communities in areas that they represent?
First Minister.
I'm not personally aware of any of that correspondence, Presiding Officer, but I think what's important is that we have a very clear strategy for the generation of electricity in our country, and the Government is giving that policy certainty, and I want to make sure that policy certainty is widely understood within Scotland.
Question number 6, Neil Bibby.
To ask the First Minister what assurances the Scottish Government can provide to the arts and culture sector to ensure confidence in light of the reported issues with the sponsorship of cultural events.
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government recognises the valuable role that corporate and philanthropic giving plays in supporting the culture sector, and we are committed to working with all interested parties to help restore the confidence that has been damaged in light of recent events. The Scottish Government has publicly called for dialogue, and crucially we have highlighted the damage that disinvestment campaigns are doing to fundamentally undermine the sector and our world-class festivals, a number of which continue to receive significant amounts of public funding. Indeed, Scottish Government funding to the culture sector is increasing by £15.8 million in this financial year to £196.6 million, and we have also recently reaffirmed our commitment to investing at least £100 million more annually in culture and arts by the financial year 28-29.
Neil Bibby.
I thank the First Minister for that answer. Many figures in Scotland's culture sector are warning the scale of their funding crisis cannot be overstated. There is a real need to shore up confidence in supporting cultural organisations. They should be targets for investment, not disinvestment. I back calls from the sector for the Government to hold a Festivals Funding Summit back in April, but the Government rejected this proposal. This position is surely now unsustainable. Can I ask the First Minister, therefore, whether he will now convene an urgent meeting of private and philanthropic supporters to ensure there is ongoing sponsorship of the arts and culture sector in Scotland?
First Minister.
I'm very happy to engage on the point that Mr Bibby has raised, and I welcome his question to me today, because it provides me with the opportunity to say a little bit more about this issue. I've personally been deeply concerned by the events that have taken place, and I have personally spoken with the leadership of Baillie Gifford because I am concerned about the targeting of that organisation, because I welcome the support that they provide in a philanthropic way to many organisations. So, and I've reassured the company of the importance that I attach to their contribution to the economy. I think the disinvestment campaigns are misplaced. I don't think they achieve their objectives. They are now jeopardising really important cultural festivals that I know Mr Bibby and I value equally. So I will take away his proposal to, I said in my original answer that the Government has publicly called for dialogue. Angus Robertson, the Culture Secretary, has been engaging heavily on this question with a number of interested parties. But if there is a further, more formal dialogue that's required, I will consider that proposal and reply to Mr Bibby.
Thank you. Move to general and constituency supplementaries, and I call Christine Graham.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. First Minister, the Cabinet Secretary is aware that there are concerns of cuts to both GP practices in Penicuik to their services due in part, they state, to NHS Lothian increasing rental costs. And as you'll imagine, I've had many emails on this from concerned constituents. Given that there is a substantial increase in house build and therefore population in Penicuik and surrounding area, will NHS Lothian have taken this into account?
First Minister.
I'll have to explore that particular point to determine if that analysis has been undertaken, but I do understand the challenge that Christine Graham raises with me. about the sharp rise in population in the Penicuik area. It will be part of the sharp rise in population in general in the south-east of Scotland, and particularly in West, Mid and East Lothian, and the City of Edinburgh, which is particularly acute, and that will place a strain on public infrastructure such as GP surgeries. The issues in relation to premises charges and utilisation costs are a matter for negotiation between GP practices and health boards, but I will take away the specific point that Christine Graham puts to me to determine what analysis has been put in place to address this issue.
Aaron Dowie.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The SNP awarded funding to River Garden, a rehabilitation centre in Auchincruive, to help 56 people recover from drug addiction, but their funding has been paused. The financial constraints mean they can currently only accommodate 6 people. The future of the facility is now at risk, with fear that it may close within weeks. Scotland has the worst drug death rate in Europe, but beds are lying empty because funding has been frozen. Will the First Minister look at this immediately and sort this out?
First Minister.
I will take away that specific. It's a very specific issue, so I can't give Sharon Dowie a direct response today. But I will take it away and explore it. We are undertaking. I think I answered a question from Mr Green a few weeks ago, which indicated that we were on target to increase the number of beds that are available for rehabilitation services according to the expectations of the National Mission. So I'm surprised to hear the information that Sharon Dowie puts to Parliament today, given the fact that my expectation is that we will achieve our published targets. But I will take away that particular issue and explore the issues in relation to River Garden.
Thank you, Bailey.
Presiding Officer, across Scotland, the NHS and social care partnerships are facing a combined budget gap of almost £1.4 billion. That means severe cuts to social care services. In Glasgow, that will lead to cuts to community health services, cuts to the discharge and resettlement teams, cuts to care home nursing teams, the loss of 72 staff posts, health visitors, nurses, allied health professionals and complex needs workers. Can the First Minister tell me why, if we all agree that we need to increase support for primary care, his government is doing the exact opposite in Glasgow and cutting social services and staff?
First Minister.
Well, this is courageous questioning from Jackie Bailey. I think Jackie Bailey has to. I've been trying to set out to Parliament for some considerable time the enormous pressure that there is on public finances. If Jackie Bailey would stop interrupting me, we might make a little bit more progress. So, we face a public spending crisis in Scotland, and what the Labour Party is proposing is to continue that austerity. That is what is being proposed. So. We've taken the hard decisions in this government to increase the resources that are available for investment in the public services. We've asked people on higher earnings to contribute more in taxation to enable us to invest more in the health service and in social care. That's what we have done. Jackie Bailey opposed that. Jackie Bailey opposed that. She opposed every single bit of it. And now there's an opportunity on the 4th of July to elect a government that could end austerity. And no, the Labour Party is not seizing the opportunity to end austerity. The Labour Party is going to prolong austerity. So I gently suggest to Jackie Bailey it would help the situation if the Labour Party committed itself to end austerity, supported this government and its agenda, and we could address the issues that Jackie Bailey is raising with me.
Evelyn Tweed.
Analysis by the Nuffield Trust has indicated that both Labour and the Tories' plans for the NHS would leave the health service with lower spending increases than during the years of Tory austerity. Does the First Minister agree with me that we should be prioritising additional investment in our NHS, not cutting it?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, as Evelyn Tweed was setting out her question, the source of her information, the Nuffield Trust, was being criticised within this Parliament. But I think it's important that we all recognise the source of the information that Evelyn Tweed was putting on the record is a much-respected health commenting organisation, the Nuffield Trust. Yep. And they've indicated that the proposals in the Labour and Conservative manifestos will result in lower increases in health spending than in the worst years of Conservative austerity. Yep. That is a missed opportunity to address the very issues that Jackie Bailey and Anna Sawar have put to me today. 100%. So we've got to ensure that we have a realistic debate about investment in the health service. This government has taken the hard decisions to increase tax on higher earners so we could invest more in the National Health Service. I wish other people would follow the example that we've taken about investment in the health service.
Liam Kerr.
Very grateful, Presiding Officer. Last week, the Courier reported, and this is a direct quote, "A new parole hearing date has been confirmed for Angus killer Tasmin Glass as she seeks release from prison after serving only half her 10-year sentence. Her case will now be considered by the Parole Board for the third time on July 26th, the day before a memorial motorbike ride in honour of her victim, Stephen Donaldson. A family spokesperson said, "The Parole Board has kept us waiting since February, and with the Scottish Parole Board deferring the decision twice already, it has been a long and difficult wait for us. The timing of the parole hearing is difficult for us." End quote. First Minister, the Courier's Voice for Victims campaign considers the parole system re-traumatises victims and needs greater transparency and communication between those involved. Does the First Minister agree? And if so, what will he do about it? First Minister.
The first thing I would say is to express my sympathy to the family that's involved in this case, to the Donaldson family. I am familiar with this case, given my adjacent representation to the areas affected. And obviously, as Mr Kerr will know, the decisions that are taken by the Parole Board are for the Parole Board, and they're independent of government, and he wouldn't expect me to comment on the substance of them. Where I accept the point that Mr Kerr is making is that all aspects of our justice system must be trauma-informed. And before my election as First Minister, I sat with colleagues on the Criminal Justice Committee hearing evidence about the Victims and Witnesses Bill, which legislates in favour of trauma-informed practice in the justice system. So I'm very sympathetic to the importance of that point in every respect. And all aspects of the justice system have to be trauma-informed. So obviously there's a range of measures that are in place already. The legislation prompts us to reconsider and review whether they are all sufficient to address these challenges and these questions, and I give Mr Kerr the commitment that the Government will do that as we explore the passage of that bill and determine whether there's any additional provisions are required to address the legitimate point that he puts to me.
Faisal Chowdhury.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. A constituent in Lothian has been diagnosed with prostate cancer and told that his tumour is growing. He is on an 8-month waiting list for surgery and has no idea when treatment will start. Public Health Scotland found only 36.4% of patients with prostate cancer receive treatment within the government's target of 62 days, the lowest of any major cancer type. Can the First Minister advise how the Scottish Government is working to bring down these unacceptable waiting times?
First Minister.
First of all, I'm sorry that Mr Chowdhury's constituent is facing the anxiety that they are facing, and if he wishes to share details with me, I will have the case examined to see if there is anything that can be done to address this particular case. The Government has invested £70 million in the endoscopy and urology diagnostic plan, which includes a commitment to develop urology diagnostic hubs which are designed to speed up the treatment of cases of the type that Mr Chowdhury puts to me, so that we can detect cancer earlier and faster, and then obviously intervene at the earliest possible stage, which is crucial in cancer care. So I assure Mr Chowdhury of the importance the Government attaches to this important area of health service policy, but if he cares to advise me about the individual case, I will see what can be done to address the issues he puts to me.
MacDonald.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The latest PMI report from the Royal Bank of Scotland has shown that Scotland was a standout performer among the UK nations and regions last month, with private sector economic growth accelerating to the fastest pace in 2 years. What assessment has the First Minister and the Scottish Government made of these findings, and what steps are the Scottish Government taking to continue to help our economy to thrive?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, I very much welcome the findings from this report, which signals a strengthening of private sector activity in Scotland, which confirms that activity has expanded for the 5th month running and at the strongest pace in 2 years. As Parliament will know, one of the 4 priorities of the Government is to strengthen the economy, and the Deputy First Minister is leading work in my support to advance these issues within Government. Some of the measures that we are taking are to build on the good work that's been done about encouraging the start-up community, with now further investment in the scale-up community, and we're seeing some of the fruits of that in the success of business, which is underpinning the very positive information that came from the Purchasing Managers Index. And I assure Mr MacDonald of the continued focus of the Government on ensuring we strengthen economic growth and economic activity, because that's the foundation of good and strong public services in our country.
Paul Sweeney.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The First Minister said that his biggest priority in Government is to eradicate child poverty, yet this morning councillors, SNP councillors and Green councillors in Glasgow voted to cut the celebrated MCR Pathways scheme by 50%. Celebrated High Court Judge Rita Reyes said this will be a disaster. It will bring people into the criminal justice system. The former Director of Education in Glasgow, Maureen McKenna, has said it's inexplicable. Members of my own family take part in the MCR Pathways scheme. It is one of the genuinely best measures we've ever developed to improve the lives of young people, get them out of harm's way, get them into opportunities, life-changing opportunities. Surely the First Minister agrees this is a regressive, retrograde step. Will he do something to ensure that the MCR Pathways scheme is not cut but expanded? It's one of the most successful public policies we have.
First Minister.
I'm very familiar with the work of MCR Pathways. I supported its introduction into public policy when I was the Education Secretary, and I recognise the transformative effect it can have on young people. Obviously, decisions about the particular allocation of funding are matters for individual local authorities. The Government has, of course, given local government a record funding settlement of over £14 billion for this financial year, and that will have been allocated proportionately to Glasgow City Council. And I would obviously encourage members to look carefully and seriously at the work of MCR Pathways, recognising the benefits it can deliver for young people around the country.
Thank you. That concludes First Minister's questions. The next item of business is a members' debate in the name of Jamie Green, and there will be a short suspension now to allow those leaving the chamber and gallery to do so before that item of business begins.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Lewis McGlynn.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Saoirse Healy.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Donald C. Stewart. Broadcasting Scotland is Scotland's independent broadcaster, providing factual news, reporting on the issues important to the people of Scotland.
We are committed to public service broadcasting, and with your support, we will produce even more programmes.
Provide opportunities for young people interested in media production and broadcasting, and challenge preconceptions of what Scottish media looks like, amplifying Scotland's voice and reflecting its communities.
We can already deliver high-quality live news, and we will create the highest quality programmes for you to enjoy. But we can only do that with your support.
So please subscribe to and share our channel or donate to Broadcasting Scotland via the link in the description. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.